Well, I'm Chris Niskanen. I'm the Communications Director for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Thank you for joining us here at the DNR. We have a big announcement today, significant development in the PolyMet project. We have a number of our folks who are calling in from outstate Minnesota on the telephone. We'll have after the news conference is done, if you have any questions, one of my staff members will give you a microphone, and that will ensure that everybody in the room can hear it okay, and also that will help that everybody else who has a camera will pick up that sound as well. Here's how we're going to do this today. Commissioner Landwehr will come up and he'll give sort of about a 5-minute introductory introduction to the FEIS, and then we will open it up to questions. As you can see, we have some visuals here. You should all have a news packet in hand. That news packet has information about today's media advisory. It has a news release. It has a disc that has the FEIS, all 3,000 pages. It has fact sheets in it. I think there are 29 fact sheets. And it has the executive summary. Now, for folks who are on the phone, all of those same materials are online. And also, the two visuals that we have in our room today, the environmental review process and also what's changed, those visuals are also online. So if you're calling in from outstate Minnesota, everything that we're seeing here today, you have access through our website on our homepage. So with that, I'm actually going to introduce a couple of other of our experts who may answer a question if called upon. This is Randall Doneen. He is the unit supervisor for our environmental review section. Very important person who helped work on this project. And Barb Naramore, who is one of our assistant commissioners. Commissioner Landwehr will be doing most of the speaking, but if you guys have a detailed question, we might call upon one of them. And they will introduce themselves and also will spell their name for you and their title. So with that, I'm going to introduce Commissioner Tom Landwehr, and you'll get us started. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I am Tom Landwehr. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources, and we're very pleased to have you here today. This is the day we've been waiting for a long time. We are releasing, along with our co-lead agencies, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Forest Service, the final environmental impact statement for the NorthMet project up near Hoyt Lakes, Minnesota. As most of you know, this is a document that is describing the open pit copper nickel mine being proposed by PolyMet Corporation, and this is the detailed analysis of that project. The final environmental impact statement does several things. It identifies, evaluates, and discloses the potential environmental impacts of the project and potential mitigations to deal with some of those impacts. This has been a long time coming. The agencies that have been involved in putting this together have brought the highest level of rigor, objectivity, and analysis to the environmental review process. It's been thoughtful, objective, and thorough. And I want to reiterate objective. The agencies have no role in either supporting or opposing the project. We just use this analysis to provide information about the impacts of the project. As Chris mentioned, the document's available on the DNR's website along with a series of fact sheets. I really encourage people to take a look at the fact sheets. They look at some of the key issues that people have identified and explain it in a very manageable fashion. The final EIS will be published in the Environmental Quality Board Monitor on Monday, November 9th, and it'll be published in the Federal Register on Friday, November 13th. At the time of publication in the Federal Register on the 13th, we begin a 30-day review period that ends on December 14th. The review period is another opportunity for the public to comment on the DNR final EIS and the adequacy of that document. I'll discuss the details of that in a moment. I thought what I'd do first is spend a little time just backing up, making sure everybody understands how we got here. Minnesota has got very rigorous environmental protection laws. One of those, it's all under Minnesota Statutes Chapter 116, is the requirement for an environmental impact statement whenever there is a potential for a governmental decision to have a major or have a significant environmental impact. By statute, all mining projects are required to have environmental impact statements. So this project triggered a mandatory EIS right from the very beginning. I want to make clear that people understand that an environmental impact statement is not a decision document. It doesn't recommend for or against a project. It is simply an analysis of the project and the environmental impacts that it may cause. Because it is a very public process, there are at least 3 places where the public can comment on it. It is a transparent and publicly inclusive process that allows for all Minnesotans to have an understanding and comment on the proposed project. I've made the analogy before that an EIS is very much like if you're going to buy a house, you get an inspection report on the house. It gives you information about the strengths and the weaknesses of the house, but it doesn't give you any information to decide whether or not to buy the house. It just tells you what you're getting if you do buy that. This EIS is very much like that. It's an informational document, again, in-depth description of the project and the potential impacts. And I can tell you, over the 10-year process that I'll describe in a minute, we have really turned this project upside down, inside out, and backward and forward to take a look at it. So it really goes back to 2005. Between 2005 and 2009, the Corps and the DNR evaluated the original PolyMet proposal, which accumulated in 2009 with the original draft EIS. That was subsequently found to be insufficient, and PolyMet subsequently significantly changed the project. So in 2010, a whole new process started based on this new project description. Also in 2010, the U.S. Forest Service joined on as a co-lead agency along with the Corps of Engineers because of a potential land exchange that the company was proposing in order to access the minerals. So we have the 3 agencies involved. The DNR, we're the responsible government unit. We're involved because ultimately if the project were to proceed, we'd issue the permit to mine. That makes us the major government unit to do the environmental impact statement. The Forest Service is involved because of the potential land exchange, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is involved because of the wetland impacts. So we started again in 2010. In 2013, recall, between December of 13 and March of 14, we put the supplemental draft EIS out for public comment. We had 3 public meetings during that period of time, and we subsequently received 58,000 public comments. So starting in March 2014 till now is essentially the time we've been using to analyze those comments, make changes where necessary, and produce the final EIS, which you'll be seeing today. We also carefully considered input from cooperating agencies, and those include the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and several tribal agencies. So we think that that process really produced some meaningful changes. It helped us produce a very thorough document, helped us really look at this from a perspective of a state as a whole. So what happens now? Once that 30-day project review period begins on next Friday, we will receive comments. People can provide comments through our website, or there's information on the website on how to provide those comments. We will subsequently review those comments and consider them as we move towards determining whether or not the EIS is adequate. At the end of that review period, we go through what we call an adequacy determination. An adequacy determination is based on 3 criteria in state statute. The final EIS has to, first off, analyze those topics that were identified in the original scoping process for the EIS. Secondly, we have to demonstrate that we received and responded to comments that were received during the public comment period. And thirdly, we have to demonstrate that the DNR followed all of the statutes related to the development of the EIS. At the end of that, the Commissioner, will render a decision as to whether or not the EIS is adequate, and that is the end of the environmental review process. It's a little different on the federal agency side. They go through a different process. Both the Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Forest Service use different processes. They ultimately end up with their own records of decision. They use a different process. I'm not going to try to describe that, but it is separate from the state adequacy of determination of adequacy. So if, in fact, the EIS is determined to be inadequate, then we are back to square one. And so everything stops at that point. If, in fact, the EIS is determined to be adequate, then we can start talking about what permitting might take place. In the case of the NorthMet project, we know that there are more than 20 permits that will be required. The DNR is responsible for some of those. PCA is responsible for some, Corps of Engineers, and so on. So there's a number of different agencies, a number of different permits that would be required. I want to highlight just a couple of changes that are in the final EIS that are different from the supplemental draft EIS, and you'll see some of that on the sideboards here. There is a new section in the final EIS that highlights the information in the EIS about human impacts. There was, in the original draft EIS, a lot of different information about human impacts, but it wasn't all in one place. So what we've done now is we've added a section that summarizes that human impact information and points back in the EIS where that information is found. We included an expanded monitoring and contingency mitigation to identify and, if needed, prevent the potential for bedrock groundwater flow northward of the mine site. We got information late in the process about the potential north flow, as we call it. We incorporated information in the document to address that. We provided some additional analysis of water flow and some of the modeling that we use to ensure that the modeling accurately describes the likely water quality impacts. And we also provided additional information on the impacts to moose, other plants and animals, and sites of biodiversity. So we are pleased to be at this point. This has been a long time coming. There is a lot of information here. There's obviously much public interest, and we want to allow you to ask some questions.
Before we move any further, Commissioner, I want to do a little additional housekeeping, take a little pause here. I see some folks that should be in our audience who aren't here right now, so I'm going to ask the folks who are members of the media who are on the phone to go ahead and identify themselves so we can just carefully take a head count. There might be people who are in transit, and we just want to take note of that. So if you're on the phone and you're a member of the media, could you just go ahead and identify yourselves, and we'll tick you off here real quick, and we'll move on with the news conference. So go ahead and first person on the phone, please.
Yeah, Bill Werner, Minnesota News Network. To clarify...
Oh, hold on, Bill. Just a sec. Bill, we're going to... do you have a question?
Just clarify our mute status and so on, if you would, for the folks, too. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. If you're listening on the phone, please mute your phone so we don't hear you eating your sandwich. So could the next person identify themselves on the phone?
Bill Hanna, Minnesota Daily News.
Thank you, Bill. John Myers, are you there?
Hi, Chris.
Excellent. Marshall Helmberger, are you there?
On our website, MinnesotaNewsNetwork.com.
Okay. I don't hear Marshall.
Dan Crocker's here with NPR.
Oh, Dan Crocker? Great, thank you. We wanted to make sure NPR was here because there was a little confusion. Any other members of the media on the phone?
This is the Minnesota News Network.
We have the Minnesota News Network. All right, I think we got everybody on the phone, and thank you for that. So we will take some questions. We want to make sure we get a good range of questions from everybody here. Who has the microphone? Julie, you have the microphone. We'll take a question from the audience first, and then we will take a question from someone on the phone. That's someone else's phone there. So anyway, first question from the audience. Raise your hand, please. Don't be shy. Josephine, you want to go first?
I can't believe I was that good that I got all the questions right out of the chute.
I was looking right at you, and so you go.
I believe the state has a law that forbids, in essence, mine closure that requires permanent water treatment. And here the EIS says that water will have to be treated indefinitely until you find a way to not treat it. Isn't that, in essence, a violation of the state law?
Well, to be clear, the state law says that we can't declare a mine closed until all of the remediation is done. So technically, the mine can continue to treat water, just not be closed. So we don't give the absolution to the company until we're satisfied the mine is completely reclaimed.
Excellent. Do you want to have a follow-up, Josephine, or?
that's all right.
All right, let's take a question from one of our folks on the phone in northern Minnesota. Go ahead.
If I could.
Yeah, is that you, John?
This is Dan Crocker.
Oh, Dan Crocker.
Commissioner, does the EIS demonstrate, as PolyMet says, that this project can meet all state and federal environmental standards?
Hi, Dan. Yes, it does. That's really the purpose of the project, is to identify the impact, identify mitigations that can be taking place to make those impacts meet state standards. So, for instance, the big one that people have focused on is sulfate. The sulfate coming out of the effluent, and state standard for sulfates, of course, in wild rice water is 10 parts per million. The project proposal is designed to ensure that it can continue to meet that 10 parts per million, and that's really what the analysis looks at is based on what the project has proposed, can they meet that state standard? And under the information in the EIS, the answer is yes. Great.
Do you have a follow-up, Dan?
I'll jump in later on, thanks.
All right, I saw someone's hand go up here. Mr. Kessler, you're familiar with the microphone. I think you can handle this one. Julie's coming around.
Rachel, would you tell us, give us a couple of highlights of what this says? I mean, I've listened to how complicated it all is, and I'm not going to pretend that we've read those 3,000 pages, but give us a couple of highlights on water quality and air quality. What will the mine do according to the EIS?
Well, two things, and I'm not going to be able to address the air quality. I might turn to Randall on that. But I think a highlight, Pat, for the water quality is that because the project, both during operation and after the mining is actually done, would involve a reverse osmosis system. We will actually be helping clean up some of the water contamination issues around the tailings basin right now. The tailings basin is currently, it's a historical tailings basin established before there were environmental regulations, is currently putting water into the groundwater that is higher in sulfate than what we'd like, by virtue of the proposed changes to the project, where we're essentially going to be, the project would essentially be capturing groundwater, piping it into a water treatment plant, and then discharging it into the watershed of the Embarrass River. It actually results in a cleaner effluent than is currently happening.
Mr. Kessler, you want to have a follow-up question to that?
In general, does this EIS demonstrate that this mine will not hurt the environment, or will this meet all the standards, and will PolyMet mine, the copper-nickel mine, hurt the environment in northern Minnesota?
Great question, and let's get right to the bottom line. The answer is that the project as proposed would meet all state standards. And of course, the standards were developed to protect the environment and protect human health. And so again, in the case of the sulfate, the ambient sulfate levels that are in the groundwater now as a result of the tailings basin are higher than the 10 parts per million by virtue of running a containment system around the tailings basin, processing that water, and then discharging it. Actually results in some improvement in water quality by virtue of the operation of the plant.
We'll take a question from one of our...
Pat asked about air. I don't know if Randall or
Randall, you
want to talk about air?
So Randall, when you get to the microphone, please spell your name and repeat your title for the folks.
Sure. Randall Doneen, RANDALLDONEEN, and I am the unit supervisor for the Environmental Review Unit. The project did look at air quality impacts. I mean, the EIS does look at air quality impacts from the project. Several different modeling were done. The project, as the modeling indicated, would meet the air quality standards that would be required under the permit. And it also looked at what the project would contribute to the greater area in like Voyage National Park and Boundary Waters, and it had very small contributions to the visibility of that area as well.
Great. We'll take a question from one of our media in northern Minnesota, Dan or Bill Werner or John Myers.
Or Bill Hanna?
Or Bill Hanna. Sorry, Bill, I forgot about you.
That's okay. Commissioner, I do have a question now where the feds and the state are doing, not coordinating reviews now? How does that work? Is there cooperation between the two as they both move forward?
Great question, Bill. And the publication of the EIS more or less ends the sort of parallel tracking of the environmental review process. We're all working under different requirements in terms of how we do analysis and permitting. The environmental impact statement development can be very consistent between what the federal government requires and what the state government requires. So we've been able to go hand in hand through the development of the EIS. But the determination of whether or not the EIS is adequate, the process is different in each of the agencies. So it's adequacy determination for the state of Minnesota. It's a record of decision for both federal agencies, but even then they use two different processes to do their ROD, we call it ROD.
And Randall, I believe we have a fact sheet on that as well, how the next decision-making, and as you see, also, Bill, if you look at one of the things on our website, when it's a blue sheet that shows the environmental review process, you can see where the three agencies sort of depart below the line of the environmental review process, and that they have sort of different steps that they go through. Josephine, yeah.
Are you saying that there's no environmental risk to this project?
Not at all. What we're saying is that what the environmental impact statement process does, it analyzes the known or likely environmental impacts and identify potential mitigations for that. It doesn't say that there's no risk. It just says, here's what we anticipate could be the risk. Here's how we would deal with the risk that's there.
And what do you see as the biggest environmental risks that this mine would create?
You know, I think if you looked at the contents of the EIS, the biggest potential risk is that to water. And that's been, you know, candidly the biggest concern of the people who have looked at the, you know, people have participated in the process and looked at the EIS. The potential for contamination, water contamination, primarily from sulfates, is I think the biggest concern, the biggest risk that people have identified. And I think that's why we spend so much time talking about what the treatment needs to be and how the treatment needs to be ensured in the future. And if the treatment is done, that we end up actually with a better water quality than currently exists. I need to clarify for some people that you know, the site is the operation is actually two different sites. There is a mine site, and that's currently unbroken ground, and then there is a processing plant. The processing plant is the old LTV iron ore site, which includes a tailings basin, which is already in place. Most of the mines operating in Minnesota today were initiated before there was the suite of environmental protections we have today, and so most of them are currently, you know, dealing with what we call legacy issues. The water quality standards are not met in, for instance, pit water, because we didn't have water quality standards at the time those pits were developed. And so by operation of this facility and extracting that groundwater from below the tailings basin and then processing it through the reverse osmosis, we actually improve the water quality in that area by not just the new water that's being used for processing, but also the existing water that's in the tailings basin and to some extent in the ground already.
We have another question here from this gentleman in the blue vest. We'll circle back to you, Josephine.
Hey, Commissioner, based on...
Could you identify yourself, please?
Brian Bax with AP.
Brian, of course. Didn't recognize you.
Based on where we're at now, what is the soonest, assuming everything goes on track, that the final decision point could be reached? And also, does this study, were you required to look at this independently of any other projects up there, either existing or proposed, to determine whether there was any cumulative effect to PolyMet?
I'm going to let Randall address the cumulative effects part of that, Bill, but the first question was the timeline for the adequacy determination. I think we've said, and I think it's on our website, that we anticipate the likely determination will be about February of 2016. So the comment period will be 30 days. We spend time analyzing those comments and then ultimately issue the record. The time that we spend analyzing the comments depends in part on how many comments there are. But again, since they're related to very narrow set of criteria, they're much easier to analyze than the 58,000 that we got previously.
What is as soon as you reach the point where you're excited?
the permitting is a whole different question. So we get to the adequacy determination, say in February, and then we start getting permit applications, and that begins, there's a whole bunch of different permits required, all of which are on different timelines. It's hard to predict how long that would be, Brian, but it would not be for 6 to 9 months at least. Randall, do you want to try the other question?
And so I think if I can repeat your question for you, Brian, for Randall, the question was, did we look at any other projects to see if this project would add to some cumulative environmental impacts? Is that true?
Existing and proposed.
Both existing and proposed. Did the EIS look at that?
Yeah, both the National Environmental Policy Act and the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act require that you look at cumulative potential impacts of a project, both past, current, and reasonably foreseeable actions that may be occurring. The EIS has a whole chapter on cumulative effects. Sure, take a look at that. We have a fact sheet on that as well. You know, while it's somewhat easy, not easy, but it's possible to look at the current situation and what's going on now because you have it there, but then you also have to project what are the reasonably foreseeable projects, what are the other projects, and you're not required to speculate at one of the projects. There has to be a basis of expectation that the project's going to occur in the future for you to include that, but we did evaluate that in the EIS.
I'd like to circle back to media in northern Minnesota and also Minnesota News Network. If anybody there on the phone has a question for the Commissioner.
Hey, Chris, John Myers here. Question on just sort of the process. It would seem to me that the DNR, by releasing this, by concluding the process, has already sort of deemed it adequate. And I'm just trying to think, what would happen that would lead the Commissioner to find it not adequate? Would it have to be something that the public submits over the next 30 days? Or, I mean, you've already said the review is sufficient. It's been well done. It's accomplished its goals. You believe the project won't have significant impact. So what could find it not adequate at this point?
Well, that's a great question, John, and I've never had to do one of these adequacy determinations, so I'm going to be looking at it with fresh eyes. But clearly, we would not have put on a document that we didn't think was adequate. So I think, you know, I think my assumption is that unless we hear some compelling evidence that we have missed the mark on one of those 3 criteria, you know, it's going to be a pretty high bar, I think, to determine that it is not adequate.
John, do you have a follow-up question?
Nope, that's fine for now, Chris. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone in our audience with a question? Yes, could you identify yourself, please?
Rob Olson with Vox 9. The bottom line here is, do you foresee anything preventing this from going forward?
Oh, absolutely. It's very premature to suggest the project can proceed from this standpoint. You know, again, I want to highlight what the EIS is. It's an analysis of the impacts and the potential mitigation. It is not a recommendation. So even though the project, as proposed, can meet state standards if it's developed as is outlined in the EIS, it does not mean that any of those 20-plus permits are all going to be granted. And any of those 20-plus permits, in and of themselves, are probably capable of changing or terminating a project. So we need to be careful to not, mistake the EIS as a recommendation document. It is just an informational document. Now, as we start talking about the permits, or if we start talking about the permits, then we're going to start talking about, should it proceed or should it not proceed based on the state statutes.
Commissioner, could you clarify, are those all state permits or are they other agencies?
They're all agencies, from county to federal to state. DNR has a handful of those. I think we've got 6 or so permits. The 2 that people focus on a lot from DNR are the high hazard dam, the class 1 dam permit, which is required for the tailings basin, and then the second is the permit to mine, which is kind of I keep saying penultimate. I'm told that's not the right word. The ultimate permit, the umbrella permit, is a permit to mine, and that is the permit that the DNR issues. But the water quality, air quality, for instance, are PCA permits.
Rob, do you have a follow-up question? Okay, good. Josephine? Well, hold on.
I want to go back.
Please speak into the microphone a little closer.
I want to go back to the tailings basin again. It is an old tailings basin. It was built, as you said, before environmental regulations. And I think my understanding of those taconite basins is they were sort of designed to leak. They were designed to seep. And so this project is not likely to capture all of the water that's coming off of that site. So then, so is that where the environmental risks to water, I mean, there's no way that they can collect all that water and put it through a processing system, is that right?
Well, there actually is a very, very high capture rate. I'm going to let Randall speak to that because that's getting into the detail that I'm not familiar with. But the capture rate is in excess of 90% of the seepage.
Yeah, no, he's right. We did estimate a 90% capture rate there. The tailings basin is proposed to have a containment system around much of the basin so that it will be capturing not only the water that would leak from the tailings from the PolyMet project, but also water that would be leaking through the existing taconite. And that containment system is around the edge, and it's tied into bedrock, and it's pressurized so that it is a pretty highly efficient system. Will it capture it all? No, but we did include those percentages that weren't captured in our water modeling for water quality impacts.
Great. The woman with the scarf in the back row there.
Hi, Lindsay Sievert from Care 11. 2 questions. How much did this process and report cost? And then secondly, I was wondering if you could detail some of the additional information on plants, animals, moose, and wild rice.
I'm going to ask maybe Barb or Randall to talk about the total cost. It's been 10 years in the making, obviously.
Lindsay, are you asking the cost of just the environmental review process?
I guess what led to this 3,000-page report. What
basically how much it costs to do this 3,000-page report.
I think Randall's been here since the very beginning, so.
Yeah, I mean, the cost has been quite large with the project, and realize there's, probably 3 main costs that have gone into it. One has been the agency's cost of our staff time working on it, our EIS consultant who has assisted us in working it, and then there's the cost that the company has borne for all of the information and data that they've provided for us to review and consider for use in the document. And the only costs that we track are our EIS consultant and our own costs, and those are in excess of $20 million.
I'm sorry, 20 million?
20 million, yes.
But I should hasten to add that we recapture those costs. These are paid for by the company. The company has to, at the beginning stages of the EIS, do a contract with us that puts all the responsibility for payment onto the company, and we recoup those costs back. So the effect is that the taxpayer should not be paying any of the costs of environmental impact.
So, and I'm curious, Randall, is there anything way to put that into context? Is there? I'm sorry, maybe I didn't. Are there Keystone Pipeline or any other ones? I know that's been in the news lately.
I don't track the costs of other ones. Clearly, it's been the most expensive EIS that we've worked on. Gotcha.
And Lindsay, you had a follow-up question?
Just the additional information on the plants, animals, moose, and there was a wild rice section. I'm just curious about that aspect of the report.
I think there's a fact sheet on that, but were you asking maybe some more details about what the EIS says about moose and plants?
Is there anything interesting that you'd like the public to know about that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, what the key thing is that as we were publishing the supplemental draft EIS, we also had revised our state threatened, endangered, and special concern list, and so the supplemental draft EIS hadn't been updated to that updated list, and so the final EIS did incorporate the changes that were associated with that list and to identify any potentials. And of course, the moose, we got a lot of comments on that as well. So we did provide additional information for that. And the last additional piece of information that we provided is some additional information related to the sites of biodiversity on the site that would be impacted from the mine site.
Great. I think Tim Pugmire here from NPR has a question. We'll be bringing the microphone over. And bring it close to your face, Tim.
Thanks. Commissioner, does this report at all illuminate the issue of financial responsibility for the company and the assurances that the governor keeps talking about?
Great question, Tim. And the reality is the EIS is not intended to go into detail about the financial assurance that might be required for the project. The EIS can describe the need for financial assurance and the types of financial assurance that might be provided, but we don't really have a handle on what financial assurance might be needed until we actually get into permitting. And then we can talk about, the 20-year operating life of the mine, the change in the reclamation costs of the mine over time, and what types of financial instruments might be needed during that 20 years and beyond to deal with the impacts that might happen if, say, for instance, the company walked away. So it's really in the permitting phase that we get into the detail of financial assurance, both in terms of the quantity of the size of the financial assurance, as well as the instrument, bond versus surety versus endowment that might be required. So it doesn't go into great detail on that. That actually comes out in permitting.
Tim, do you have a follow-up question? Rachel Stassenberger, do you have a question there? And speak closely into the microphone, please.
Just back to the $20 million cost, has PolyMet already started reimbursing the state for any of those costs? If not, at what point, and how much has the state gotten back so far?
If I'm not mistaken, we bill quarterly, so.
They actually pay ahead.
Yeah. So we've already recouped the costs.
Yep.
They give us the money.
Yeah. And actually, I think that number was, we shared that with the media back when we did the SDEIS too, but, welcome. So let's see if there's any more questions from the media in northern Minnesota or from Minnesota News Network.
No, I got to say, I was in Mountain Iron this morning. I'm a little disappointed these folks didn't drive down here.
You were in Mountain Iron for the Governor's Deer Opener. So I want to make sure, though, that Bill Hanna or John Myers or Marshall Helmberg or any of those folks have a chance to do a follow-up question.
I've got all mine answered.
Excellent. Well, then I'm going to look to the audience. Oh, we have more questions here. We're going to try the gentleman over here first. Please identify yourself.
Yep, Nick Minock with KBJR in Duluth. So the tribes in northern Minnesota are concerned that this mine will impact wild rice waters. Under this analysis, does it?
Well, the important point to remember in the environmental review is that in order for a project to proceed, it must meet all state water quality standards. And in the case of this project, the state water quality standard of interest is the sulfate standard. Sulfate standard in Minnesota is set at 10 parts per million because that is the level for wild rice. And so the project as proposed would meet that standard.
And Nick did drive down here from Duluth, so we'll hand it over to Mr. Kessler again.
Yeah, one more question about the overall with this. You repeatedly say that this project meets, as proposed, meets all the air and water quality standards. Is that the same as saying that the PolyMet project is safe? It's safe for the environment, for the folks who live around there?
Well, so let me parse that apart a little bit if I could, Pat. So the state standards for air quality and water quality, for instance, are intended to both protect the environment and protect humans. So that is, the state's sort of goal for ensuring that it is a safe project, or those standards. So if a project meets those standards, then ostensibly it is a safe project. Now, presumably there's always a chance for something to go wrong, and that's factored into the permitting. If something goes wrong during the operation, then the company is liable for fixing what might go wrong.
So this is your imprimatur telling the state that the PolyMet project is safe for the environment?
What it says is that the PolyMet project, as proposed, meets state standards, the state standards of which were set to maintain a safe environment for people and the environment.
I think that's good clarification. We're going to wrap this up here soon, folks, so if you have any follow-up questions, now's the time to do it. Again,
Can I ask one question?
Yes, is that you, Dan?
Yeah. As you guys know, some of the opponents of the project have asked for a third party to run some of the water models that they can test. Why isn't something that the state has done?
My response to that would be, I think the state is operating as a third party. We are truly neutral. We're neither in support of or opposed to the project, and we've got the best expertise available to do the analysis. So I think the fact is we've got the objective analysis done. part of the purpose of the public comment period was to find, is to find out, is there other analyses that might be out there that would demonstrate there's something wrong with the state's analysis. And, again, that's all been incorporated into the final document.
Can I have one follow-up, Chris?
Sure, Dan.
Is the state truly neutral, given, it's written into the Constitution to promote mining in Minnesota, isn't it?
Well, it's not in the Constitution. I think it's State Statute 93001 says the state shall promote and exploit the extraction of minerals, but that doesn't say that we have to be supportive of any particular project. It just says it's the policy of the state that we should develop these minerals, and other parts of state statutes say we should do it in an environmentally sound manner, and that's the environmental review that we're going through today.
Great. With that, folks, we'll go ahead and sign off. If you have any follow-up questions, you can go ahead and email me or give me a call on my phone. And it is the deer opener, so this place is going to clear out pretty fast here as everyone goes heads up to their deer hunting land. So thank you for coming, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.